My name is Logan. I'm one of the trainers at our Woodbury location. I started about a year and a half ago at Plymouth, so I recognize a lot of faces here. Your friend was just in tonight. She's great. Oh, there she is. Hi, Barbara. Hi again. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about 10 key takeaways from the book Body by Science. First off, has anyone read this book? Raise your hand. Awesome. More than at Minneapolis this afternoon. This is something that we recommend to all of our clients if they're interested in learning a little bit more about the why of their workouts. It's also something that is required reading for all of our new trainers, right? So we have a few books that we make people start off with, and this is one of the foundational texts that we use. So a little bit about this book. It was published in 2009. It was published by two guys who are kind of legends in the high-intensity training community. So Dr. Doug McGuff and John Little. Both of them actually own their own high-intensity training studios. For any of you who are familiar with the conference we put on every year, Doug McGuff was actually one of our keynote speakers last year. He brought me to tears talking about exercise, if you can believe that. So these two guys, this book has kind of become the jumping off point for probably a few of you that raised your hands tonight. I talked to a guy in Minneapolis this afternoon. That book was the reason why he actually came to Discover Strength. If you haven't read it, I definitely recommend that you do. Essentially what it did is it took these anecdotes that we knew from high-intensity training and just kind of distilled everything down and used recent science to back up everything that the anecdotes had been supporting, right? So it makes evidence-based exercise make sense. So here's all the takeaways. We'll go through each one of these one by one, and we can do some questions at the end. Number one here, forest through the trees. So the first thing I want to share with you guys is just an analogy, a little anecdote from the book that Dr. McGuff shared. It's the Miracle Supplement Paper story. So McGuff had a friend that was working for a supplement magazine, like a bodybuilding magazine, and one of their ads actually pulled out at the last minute. So just kind of as a joke, one of the writers decided to put up this fake ad saying that if you cut out this little strip of paper at the bottom of the magazine and stuck it in your water overnight, it had a special blend of amino acids that would give you this amazing workout the next day. And how many of you can guess what happened the next week? They were just inundated with people looking for more of this amazing paper, right? So not to say that people in this industry are gullible, but they're gullible, right? They're looking for the next big thing, the easy fix, right? A lot of times we tend to look at the outliers in this industry as authorities. Now, I have no idea why I put this written as Yoda here, but a great set of biceps does not an expert make, right? Just because you have an awesome set of pipes doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. This is why a lot of gurus, so to speak, have conflicting information. Why one person tells you that you should do CrossFit because it's the only way to get in great shape, and another person tells you that if you're not working out with kettlebells, you're just completely wasting your time, right? It's because it works for them, doesn't necessarily work for everyone. I got the great one here, Wayne Gretzky. I know this is hockey country. The reason for this is McGuff uses an analogy in the book where he talks about a hockey training study, and he says if you take somebody who's an outlier like Wayne Gretzky and put them in a big study testing just hockey skill acquisition, one person like this can throw off the mean, the statistical average, by 3 to 4 standard deviations, which for anyone who knows anything about statistics is just huge, right? So an outlier can totally skew the data. So the big takeaway from this is whatever we're talking about when it comes to exercise has to work for the masses, not just the most muscle, because they're going to get results no matter what. Next one here, very related to the first point, assumed causality of activity and appearance. So this guy here obviously lifts heavy, right? That's why he's got such big muscles. He might be taking some other not quite over-the-counter supplements as well, but a lot of times we just assume he looks like this because he lifts those big weights, right? Now, if you want these long, lean Pilates muscles, you have to do Pilates. You gotta get on the reformer if you want to look like this lady here, who's just got an incredible physique naturally. And then this idiot here, if you want to look good naked, you obviously have to do whatever this guy does. That's my book, by the way. It's on Amazon. It's got 5 stars. Anyways, continuing here, we like to assume that the activity creates the adaptation. But in reality, It's the adaptation leading to selection bias for specific activities. So if I'm 7'2", I'm probably not going to try to become a jockey in the Kentucky Derby, right? I'm going to be drawn to basketball. If I'm 4'11", playing center for the New York Knicks is probably not my future, right? So we get selection bias to specific activities. And competition, it can be said as just a form of accelerated evolution. So the cream of the crop based genetically are going to rise to the top here. I love this example that they use in the book. McGuff talks about if you sit at a college swim meet, you'll see the different genotypes change over time. Just for dramatic effect, we're going to look at a high school swim team first here, right? So you can see the difference in the body types in these guys. Some people are shorter and wider, some are taller and leaner, some have really broad shoulders, but a big spectrum of different body types. We go up to the next level. This is the USC men's swim team. You can see these body types are getting a lot more homogeneous here, right? We've got broad shoulders, flat stomachs, long legs. Still a little discrepancy in height, but getting a lot similar. This is the US men's swim team. These guys look so similar, you could literally Photoshop their bodies onto one another and they probably couldn't tell themselves apart, right? So is it the activity or is it the genetics that lead to the adaptation? So the best supplement we have, hands down, known to man, pick your parents, man. If you have the chance to do it, right? This is Ken Griffey Jr. here. His father played in the major leagues for a long time. Ken Griffey's a Hall of Famer. His son is now a stud at the University of Arizona. Forget creatine, forget protein. Pick your parents if you have the chance. Number 3 here, we're doing the definitions of health, fitness, and exercise. So these seem like really fundamental terms, but there's a lot of disagreement in the scientific literature on what these things really mean. At the end of the day, it just kind of comes down to the difference between catabolism and anabolism. And for those of you who don't know what those terms mean, you hear us talking about it all the time at Discover Strength through the lens of hypertrophy and atrophy, right? So we talk about building muscles up, hypertrophy, and then atrophy that we get with skeletal degeneration after the age of 50 is going to be atrophy, right? So the building up is anabolism, the breaking down is catabolism. So let's look at these definitions from the book. So health, according to Body by Science, is a physiological state in which there is an absence of disease or pathology, and it maintains the necessary biologic balance between the catabolic and the anabolic. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't see anything in there about diet, being vegan, going keto, working out a specific way. It's simply saying in order to be healthy, you have to have a lack of disease and negative pathology. That's all health really is in a nutshell. The next one here is fitness. This is the one we're obsessed with, right? The bodily state of being physiologically capable of handling challenges that exist above a resting threshold of activity. So what that's saying is this is a spectrum, right? There's a continuum that starts with this poor guy on the left here that's having trouble getting out of the chair to this crazy psychopath that's doing an ultra marathon through the Sahara Desert, right? So there's a spectrum here. Now this is better than being bedridden, right? But arguably this might not be great for your health either. So exercise. I could not help myself. I was Googling Discover Strength and I found all these old pictures of Luke. They're classic, so I put them up there. All right, so the definition of exercise is a specific activity that stimulates a positive physiological adaptation that serves to enhance fitness and health, but does not undermine the latter in the process of enhancing the former. So what that's saying is when we're doing exercise, it should improve our health and our fitness together, but we don't want to jeopardize our health in the attempt to improve our fitness too much. And we'll dive into that a little more next. So does what you're doing constitute as exercise? I would say if you're working out at Discover Strength, 100% it does. So number 4, some is good, more is not better. A couple famous Greek examples here. Eucydus was a famous Greek runner, ran 125 miles in one day, promptly died, fell down dead, right? Phidippides, you guys may have heard this legend. This is a famous painting of him. He ran 145 miles in one day from Athens to Sparta, then back from Marathon to Athens to proclaim the Greeks' victory over the Persians. And then guess what happened? Dead, right? So now we celebrate these guys with marathons, right? But the data suggests that long-distance runners are more likely to develop this litany of diseases. First and foremost here, you'll see cardiovascular disease, right? So how can improving your health through long-distance running jeopardize your cardiovascular system? Well, that's what the research suggests when we take fitness to an extreme. So how much is too much for me? 0.0. I'm never running 26.2. Good luck to the rest of you. I love this little graph I was able to find here. So this really illustrates this point. Health and fitness track to a point, but at a certain point, your fitness can improve while your health declines. So what this is showing here, your health risks on the y-axis, your fitness on the x-axis over here. When you're not doing anything, your risk of negative consequences to your health is significantly high. Right, as we start to work out, as we start to exercise appropriately, we hit this perfect little valley here, where the only thing that's going to kill us is maybe walking across the street, right? As long as we're doing our push-ups every day. But once you start taking that to an extreme, now these health risks may be different than they were over here, but they're still increasing the more you take that fitness to a crazy degree. I like personally to think about everything through an evolutionary lens. So when I think about animalism and cannibalism, I like to think about hunting, right? The hunter-gatherers, where we came from. And it's the perfect kind of analogy for that. We track an animal down, we have to find it, kill it, drag it back to camp, and then you get the building up, the anabolic part of eating it and building up protein, right? But we don't have to do that anymore. You can get meals delivered to your door with your exact macronutrient breakdown. So how do we, in the 21st century, maximize health and fitness together? Well, this is what Doug McGuff proposes from the book here. Ultimately, we need to make a concerted effort to learn how to distinguish between fitness and health. And we must shift our focus from how much exercise we can endure to how little we precisely require to cultivate the positive fitness properties from exercise, thereby enhancing our species' chances for improved health and longevity, right? So exercise, fitness, what you're doing twice a week for 30 minutes is all about maximizing health and longevity, or it should be. Number 5, global metabolic conditioning. We're not going to dive too deeply into this. For those of you that came to my last seminar back in October or November, remember me going really deep on here. Essentially just a quick review. So the McMaster studies were these 2 studies that were conducted at McMaster University. Short version is they took regular steady-state cardiovascular exercise, so 90 to 120 minutes per session, and they matched it up against sprint interval training, so 30 seconds of all-out effort with short recovery periods. Okay, so about a max of 6 minutes of actual effort per week in that sprint group versus a few hours in the traditional steady-state group. What they found was the same improvements in cardiovascular markers. So same improvements in VO2 max, same improvements in endurance, same improvements in all the cardiometabolic markers with that fraction of the work. So really the name of the game in exercise and this idea of global metabolic conditioning is aggressive recruitment and momentary fatiguing of target musculature. Would you rather run for 30 minutes or do 30 seconds of leg press? I know your answer. Maybe 45, right? Okay, so the big takeaway here, you cannot isolate the aerobic system. The only way is through anaerobic work using musculature, right? So if traditional cardio is your goal, you just want to improve your cardiometabolic markers, do strength training. It is the best, hands down. Now, if your goal is specific, if you want to run a marathon, if you want to do a triathlon like David Kay out in Plymouth, because he's a crazy person, you have to practice that skill, right? You have to swim, you have to run, you have to bike, because that's the only way you're going to get better at those things. But general overall cardiovascular health can be improved just through strength training. Number 6, the dose-response relationship. So this is really appropriate because every time you're at Discover Strength, we talk about your exercise prescription. Right? And this is viewing exercise as a drug. The concentration would be the intensity. The dosage would be the number of sets performed. And then the dosing frequency is just the frequency of exposure to the training. So at Discover Strength, the concentration, that intensity level, as high as possible. The number of sets, full body, typically 8 to 12, taken to momentary failure. And then the frequency, twice per week for 30 minutes, or for 45 if you're doing groups. This is the narrow therapeutic window that we talk about when you're talking about an actual prescription medication, but the same holds true with exercise, right? So if you take too little of a drug, there's no effect. There's a sweet spot right in the middle, and then we get to the ill side effects over here. The way to think about it is if you take some Tylenol for your headache, you only take one, that's not the prescribed amount, you still have your headache a few hours later. You take 3 or 4, whatever's on the bottle, headache goes away. You take 40, you end up in the hospital, right? The same holds true with exercise. Cascading effect of muscle recruitment. We're not going to dive too deeply into this, but I just want you guys to understand how muscle recruitment works. If you've ever heard in your sessions talking about fast twitch, slow twitch, type 1, type 2, essentially all this is saying is that when we're doing a proper set of exercise, as we get closer to maximal force, we're starting to recruit our fibers in a sequential order that starts with the slowest and moves towards the fastest. Now, slow doesn't mean they actually fire slowly. These are actually the faster twitch fibers. They just fatigue more slowly. The reason your fast fibers are called fast is because they give out really quickly. So when you get that last burst on your last few reps, and then all of a sudden the gas tank is empty, that's because you fatigued the whole system. So resistance training is superior to traditional cardio and other forms of exercise simply because a higher intensity just requires more weight. You don't have to do more volume. You don't have to hit the track a few more times. Same benefits from one set as multiple sets. We all know this. The authors argue that 1 time per week is sufficient. I would say they have a little bit of a user bias just based on the populations that they train. For the most part, I would say the therapeutic window of exercise falls probably 1 to 3 times per week if you're strength training the way we do at Discover Strength. Number 7, the big 5. So has anybody ever heard this when they've been in session? Maybe you're running 15 minutes late. All we got time for is a big 5. Let's do it, right? We're gonna run in? Nobody? You probably have, you just don't even know. So this is the workout they advocate in the book. You can kind of think of it as a mutual fund for your exercise in the sense that it's a safe bet that you can always go back to and get the most metabolic bang for your buck. So the most important thing when you're doing this routine is just finding equipment that you can use safely. Okay, the reason we use Med-X, Nautilus, Hammer Strength at Discover Strength is just because it's really high-end equipment, but you can use really good equipment poorly, and you can use really poor equipment really well, right? It's just a matter of being smart. So this is what the workout consists of. All of this I was able to find Med-X equipment. We've got a chest press, a seated row, a torso arm or some kind of vertical pull, an overhead pressing movement, and then a compound hip movement, typically a leg press. So that's what comprises this big 5 routine. Now the reason I picked these pictures is because you can see just the vast difference of array of types of people who can use this routine, right? You've got probably a 9 or 10-year-old here, down to somebody who looks like he's in a bodybuilding magazine at the bottom. So this is a routine we'll typically use with some of our younger clients. Does anybody here have kids that come and train with us? Yeah? So the kids' routines we build up are usually based around a big 5. And the thinking for this is that when you're using simple compound movements, push, pull, right, leg press, it just lowers the bar for entry, right? So there's less to move. The skill acquisition required in those movements is really low, right? The principle behind this whole thing is that when you're doing these compound movements, you end up sequentially recruiting those fibers like we talked about, right? So the first time you come to Discover Strength and do a chest press, you might leave and only feel it in your pecs. The next time you come in, you might start to feel your triceps talking to you a little bit when you leave. A couple months down the road, after one set, literally your entire upper body feels like it's shutting down at the end. Why is that? Well, all those surrounding muscle fibers, all the different body parts surrounding that compound movement are now getting integrated as the intensity gets higher. The execution should just be slow and controlled. Whatever that looks like on the equipment you have available, trying not to break up the movement. So there's something called segmentation. That's just when we're breaking it up, right? So if you're moving 10 seconds, but you're chopping up the movement, you should probably be moving a little bit faster. Just want it to be smooth. When you get to failure, just try hard, fail hard, move on to the next one. A lot of people in our industry kind of view this routine as the panacea, right? In the sense that you can get all these benefits from these 5 simple movements, and there's people who will swear to you up and down that this is all they ever do, no matter what, right? You gotta stick with the big 5. Well, there's a caveat. So Dr. Doug McGuff, like I said, was at our conference last year. He was one of the keynote speakers, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but towards the end of his speech, he basically said, I sometimes wish I'd never even called it the big 5. People miss the point, right? The point is not that you have to do these 5 movements. The point is to pick simple compound movements that are going to target the most available musculature and make it hard for you. Number 8, enhancing the body's response to exercise. So this is the formula, plain and simple, for how we get positive adaptation. Sufficient stimulus, sufficient recovery equals positive adaptation. No protein, no supplements, nothing else required. Now those things can come into play, but at the end of the day, it's all about stimulus and recovery. So here's some other key elements to help enhance the adaptation. Sleepy kitty there just represents sleep, and he's really cute. Hydration, water, right? Eating right, this is the nutrition piece. This is when we talk about adding in that appropriate amount of protein. Maybe you take creatine. Maybe you take some other kind of supplementation that would fall under there. And then finally is just reducing your stress level overall. A lot of the people that we get that come to us at Discover Strength have stressful lives. How do we try to minimize that stress? Biggest thing, I love this point that they talk about in the book here, is don't cultivate training angst, right? The reason you come to us is to get the best results possible in the minimum amount of time. The rest of your time, you should be enjoying your grandkids. You should be playing golf if that's what you want to do. You should be going for a run. I don't know why you would, but maybe you like running, right? If that's what you're into, do it, right? You don't need to be obsessed with this idea that you have to train all the time because you miss out on the benefits of it. There's no magic pill in exercise. It's work hard, recover, and take some time to enjoy the benefits. Number 9 here, tweaking the exercise stimulus. The way they describe proper exercise in the book is kind of the hub of the wheel. And what this means is that to qualify as productive exercise, training has to be demanding to the muscles, but performed in such a way that force is controlled and the muscles are being weakened to a point of positive failure. So that just means get to muscle failure and be safe, right? Everything else we can kind of mess around with. And this is why we don't do just the big 5 at Discover Strength, because people crave variety. They want to try something new. They don't want to come in and do the same thing every single day, right? Not that you couldn't, but why would you, right? Especially if we have the tools and the ability to do other things. So the spokes of the wheel, those little strings that we can pull on to manipulate your workout, it's kind of like Jenga pieces, right? If we pull them too hard, the whole thing could topple. Has anybody here ever done like a total negative only workout? Just been crushed the next day, right? If we manipulate some of these variables, we might have to, make a little, I can't think of the right word, make a little adjustment somewhere else in our recovery, right? So the cause and effect relationship is multifactorial. So it's more than about just muscle damage. Otherwise, we could skip leg extension forever, and we just beat your legs with a hammer and just call it a day, right? But based on the goals and sticking points, there are some different techniques you can use to break through some plateaus. So a lot of you guys will recognize these names here. We've got forced repetitions, partial range reps, time static holds, rest pause, negative only reps. But it all comes back to whatever of these you're doing, there is that therapeutic window. So when we start out at Discover Strength, you could probably train 3 or 4 days a week if you wanted to, if you've never done any exercise before, because you're not going to exceed your recovery period. But pretty quickly as you're training and you get more intense, you need more time to recover. Now, we don't know what the max is that you can go away and not lose your benefits. Some people take a month off and come back stronger. But we do know that there's a minimum time. You cannot do this every day and expect to see results. You have to give your body some time to recoup. A few other strategies here. Big 5 to big 3 just means shrinking the volume, taking it down a notch. Splitting routine just means maybe doing different body parts on different days. Another way to just shrink volume. Max contraction protocol would just be shrinking the overall volume in a particular workout. I really like this particular protocol if anybody's ever done max contraction. I just feel like it minimizes the stress on the joints. Big takeaway though for this point is just all these things are tools in your tool belt to be used when appropriate. Last piece here, number 10, the genetic factor. The rarity of supply and demand when it comes to extreme muscularity, it's really rare, man. Not many people are going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And this can disillusion men, and it can scare women off that they think they're going to look like whatever the heck she is over here, right? Because she's got bigger traps than Arnold in that picture. She is 1 in a billion, okay? These are the estimates of extreme muscularity according to Mike Mentzer, who's another famous guy in the high-intensity world. He estimates that possibly 20 in 100,000 men have the genotype for this. Of those 20, probably only 10 will actually have the desire. Of those 10, maybe 1 will have the tools, the nutrition, and the understanding. So that leaves about 1 in 100,000 are going to have that physique. So it's none of us. Sorry, guys. The only one that you can accurately compare yourself to is going to be you. Because my progress is different than Brian's progress, is different than Tim's progress. But your comparison to you 5 years ago, 2 years ago, last month is where you're going to see the best improvements. Different body types here. I'm sure you guys are somewhat familiar with this. We've got ectomorph, endomorph tends to store a little more fat, and then mesomorph. Okay, so kind of a blend, low fat, high muscle. Most of us are a blend of these 3 body types. A couple other contributing factors to how you're physically going to look. Muscle length. If you have really long muscle bellies or really short muscle bellies, the length is never going to exceed the width of your muscles, right? As far as skeletal formation, if we have really long limbs, you probably don't have the correct build to be a bodybuilder. Bodybuilders typically have medium length limbs. Neuromuscular efficiency just talks about how many nerves are actually innervating your muscular fibers, right? So the more nerves that are innervating, the more you have the potential to recruit. Muscle fiber density just means how packed are those actual muscle fibers. The shape and size potential, this is a great one to keep in mind when we're wondering why we can't develop a particular area. So 2 main types of muscles here. Fusiform are going to be like the biceps, layered over each other, have a better ability to expand like a football, right? Pennate are going to be like the metatarsal muscles here in between your hands, right? So if these expanded the same way our biceps did, we'd all be walking around like this, right? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Myostatin is a really interesting genetic inhibitor. If you lack this gene, you end up looking like that, right? So that's a Belgian blue, has absolutely no myostatin through selective breeding. That is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I cannot prove it, but I'm pretty sure he's lacking myostatin as well. Genes and hormones, we're getting towards the end here, guys. Genes and hormones just affect how your body responds to training stimuli. Genetics can be a determining in your response. So there's a lot of cool research that's coming up in the industry in this idea that maybe we can determine the best type of programming for you specifically. And what this would look like is maybe your body type, your genetic predisposition is for lower weights with higher reps or higher weights with lower reps. There might actually be some science to this now, but we don't actually have it yet. So for the moment, it's really important when you're talking to your trainer, what do you think works for you? What do you respond best to? What can you mentally do when you're in session? That's going to help us hone this in. Last thing we're going to talk about today is epigenetics. Just a really cool field in the genetic department that's been kind of up and coming in the last decade. And essentially what epigenetics is that thing that your mom told you, who you hang out with really influences who you are as a person. Well, it turns out it's true. So there's these genetic switches that can be turned on and determine just how we live our lifestyle. So the study they use in the book says 57% increased risk for obesity by associating with obese people. I heard about another study recently where they took semen for men who were overweight, and then they had them lose weight, and they found healthier versions of the semen when they lost a significant amount of weight. So you can actually impact your future generations based on how you're treating yourself, and you can start doing that today. Quick recap here, 1 and 2, just because someone is jacked doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. Number 3, definitions of health, fitness, and exercise. 4, more isn't better. Number 5, resistance training for cardio. Number 6, exercise is medicine and the dose-response relationship. 7 was the minimum effective dose approach. 8 and 9, how to enhance and tweak your response. And then finally, unfortunately, you can't beat genetics. You can pick your nose, but you can't pick your parents, right? If you like this book, you should also read the Body by Science Q&A book. It really delves a lot deeper into a lot of these points if this is something you're interested in. If you like exercise, chances are you're doing it wrong. The new high-intensity training, a practical approach to strength training. Oh my God, how'd that get up there? How to look good naked? By yours truly. Available on Amazon. Any questions?